think of a computer. That's what I want you guys to do for me in this episode. Think of a computer with 100 different slots for memory cards to be inserted, right? So you got 100 empty slots, and then you have one memory card that is inserted into one out of the 100 slots, right? And the reason why the other 99 slots are not being filled with these memory cards is because we don't have access to these memory cards. Now, I want you guys to understand and think about the way in which the universe we live in works. Now, this is not so much a spiritual episode, but there are things that will tie back to this proposal. So just please bear with me now. With that being said, think about the world we live in right now as these kind of computer slots, and we're only living in a world where one memory card is inserted, right? But what happens if you insert another one and another one? The computer that you're inserting these chips into is able to read these memory cards for what they are and understand that these memory cards actually work in conjunction with one another. Hence, partly the reason for the title of this episode, which is Synthetic Synergy Clones. Now, before I jump into that, I just want to give a quick shout out to a few people, to Raj Nima, Dooz GX, 9/11 First Responder Awakened Adam. I'd like to thank him very much for his service. He's probably going to be coming on the show sometime soon to talk about some things that he saw during 9/11, believe it or not. And as well as Nasty Mate 5000. That's his one of his social media usernames. So thank you guys, all of you, for watching so much. I appreciate it. Now, let's jump into it. So we got a lot to cover here. We're going to be talking about a few different things. But first off, what I want everyone to understand is that cloning has been going on since at the very least the 1940s. The Nazis were, I guess you could say, one of the originators of such thing, but it was then adopted by the Allies, particularly in the West, the United States. Now, there's 5 different levels of cloning. There's Mach 1, Mach 2, all the way to 5. Now, Mach 1 and 2 are not really used anymore. It was something that was used more so back in the 50s and 60s, particularly during the Kennedy era. But the issue here is that these synergetic clones have the ability to move, behave just like humans. However, there is a major issue that is still at play right now that every major country has trouble doing, which is creating and implementing a soul within these clones. Now, what we're going to do next is we have to understand that DEW weapons, right, direct energy weapons, are constantly at play here. So we're going to be connecting a lot of things. Now, what I want you guys to first understand is there's a company called ADEX, right? ADEX, and if you look at their website, according to them, is an innovative software company specializing in optimization, control, and regulation of industrial plants to increase performance, sustainability, and flexible operation. Now, essentially, they help power plant, end quote, they help power plants implementing software. I want you guys to keep ADEX in mind because this is going to tie back very, very soon. Now, if we take a look at what's occurring in Iran, and this is all going to tie back, what we're going to see is that the United States and Iran have always had a very strained relationship. Now, the question might be why? Well, listen, there's a lot of political history there, and that is absolutely true. But one of the main reasons for this is because the Iranians and the Americans were going head-to-head many years ago when America wanted to implement the Federal Reserve Bank into Iran. Now, the Federal Reserve is essentially, long story short, it's not really a Federal Reserve. It's pretty much the way that the U.S. wants to control everything economically, because if they have the power militarily, the next thing is economics, right? So the Federal Reserve essentially ensures that whichever country it is instituted and placed into, it can help control, curate, and manifest different illicit funds, whether they're legitimate or not. So Iran denied that. They didn't want that. That's first off. So did Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, and that's a different subject, but long story short, ironically, the people the U.S. goes to war with are the same ones that oppose the Federal Reserve banking. However, there's something else in Iran, particularly reported by the Tehran Times, that the United States really wanted, which is that they wanted access to the salt mines. Why do they want access to the salt mines? Because the mummies that they're finding in salt mines, and I say mummies with air quotes, are not so much mummies. They're actually, I guess you could say, recently deceased clones. Now, the United States wanted access to these salt mines because it is a perfect place and it is energetically fueled based on the lead lines around the globe to have the ability to suppress and keep these clones at bay and asleep or in some form of cryosleep for an extended period of time. Now, you might say, Dave, what does this have to do with DEW weapons? So, when we go to sleep every night, particularly within the West, but around the world, HAARP, HAARP, the institution that is extremely mysterious that the Europe and the UN is very shady about and the United States won't ever talk about, which has been accused for weather control and things like this. is emitting very low frequency but mind suppressing radiation and vibrations overnight in order for people's mindsets to become more and more deprived. Why do you go to sleep sometimes and you wake up super tired? Nothing was wrong. You're not feeling sick. You're not on any medication or anything like this. You go to sleep, you get a good 8-9 hours, you wake up tired. Or what about those days when everyone coincidentally is feeling very gloomy, ironically, and they think, well, okay, maybe the sun's not out today and it affects the human body and things like this, right? No, it's not even that. It's these low frequency mind control suppression DEW weapons. Now, when I say mind control, I don't necessarily mean it controls them as in, or controls us as in we get up like zombies and things like this. However, there's evidence to suggest through the 8X files as well, the 8X company, that sleepwalking has been the sort of subsequent side effect result of such events. However, we have to understand that these are used in order to dumb us down so that we do not recognize these synergetic synthesized clones or synthetic clones when they are walking among us. Why is the case? Because these clones, as easy as they are to make on a secret level within the deep underground military bases, they are not perfect. They cannot produce a soul. Now, the Mach 5 clones, allegedly, have the ability to survive on their own for up to about a year. Now, the thing about these clones is that there's some glitches every so often that seem to pop up. Now, it doesn't mean that these glitches represent the fact that these clones were artificially made and they are a brand new person entirely, but what this represents is a consciousness transfer. Now, if we take a look at someone by the name of Donald Marshall, he was a former accountant for the CIA Black Budget program, as well as had access to a lot of different things. He recently was found deceased, allegedly. Now, again, this is ironic, coincidentally speaking of the similar things he's been coming out with, along with a handful of other people too, and Phil Schneider and Al Bailek and you name it. Now, if we take a look, what we're going to find here is that Donald Marshall was speaking about the cloning capabilities and the amount of clones that are walking the streets today. But he said the main problem is that these clones glitch and sort of reset, and as a matter of fact, a lot of the elites in the world have actually had their consciousness transferred over into these clones. Now, again, we can get into what consciousness is and how to define consciousness and how things like that transfer, because, again, consciousness, again, could it be your soul? Could it be the awareness of the environment? It's all defined differently, but the CIA seems to, according to their public documents, they seem to have the best definition of consciousness set. Now, the reason why these glitches occur, and we've seen them many times actually, the most recent example would probably be Nancy Pelosi when she was on the news with George Stephanopoulos. I think it was about a month ago, give or take, where she was speaking with George Stephanopoulos, the ABC News reporter in the morning talk show host, reporter host. He then asks her a question in response, and it's like she completely reset. Her face kind of went like that, it kind of jerked, and then she said, "Oh, good morning, George." And I'm putting up for those on YouTube the screenshots right now. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Now, this doesn't mean that Nancy Pelosi is a clone. What it means, though, is that her, according to Donald Marshall, her consciousness is in the midst of being transferred, because as people get up there in age, I mean, assuming you can transfer your consciousness from one body to another, why wouldn't you, right? Now, Donald Marshall also said, now whether or not that's for good or bad is up to the specific individual doing it. It depends what they do with that technology, right? But Donald Marshall also said that they drop feed some of this technology and so this possibility of technology into the mainstream media. And look, we've seen that many times before. Let's take a look, for example, at the film Altered Carbon, or the show Altered Carbon on Netflix. I have provided more than enough references to Altered Carbon. That is just one form of many predictive programming statements and sort of implementation of subliminal psychological introversion. Now, when we take a step back, what we're also going to see here is that according to, and I find this interesting because if we take a look at Al Bailek, Gary Webb, Donald Marshall, Phil Schneider, all of these men, even Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian defense minister, they've all said, and none of these men have seemed to come in contact with one another, all from very separate time frames as well within the last, 50 to 70 years. Now, they've all said simultaneously that for every 12 months, for every year that goes by, the military or the CIA or the Pentagon advances for about 44 to 50 years, right? So essentially, for every year that goes by, they advance about roughly 50 years technologically. That is insane. Again, I guess that is a great thing, but at the same time it isn't. It's just extremely advanced to know that they are anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 years ahead. Now, think about the human race 3,000 to 5,000 years from now. Do you think humans publicly will be able to transfer their consciousness? You would certainly hope so, because with the way that we're evolving right now technologically, you would certainly hope, I would certainly hope it would be possible, right? Now, the next thing I want to talk about is that we have to take a look at the salt mines in Iran and why ADEX, a software company for power plants, has such a deep involvement in it. Now, what we first have to do, though, is we have to take a look at the UN denying or looking to ban cloning on a global level. So what I had to do was I had to pull up articles from a very long time ago. So what we'll see here, and we're looking at these articles from anywhere from 10 to 15 years ago. This one here is from August 30th, 2004 from The Guardian. Scientists call for UN compromise on cloning. Okay, the next one is France and Germany seek UN ban on cloning of humans. This is August 10th, 2001. Why is this? Because the second cloning became public from a public scientist level, you cannot simply murder a scientist for discovering something if he did it in a public level with public funds. It's way too public and adhesive to do. So what do? You immediately go to the world stage and ban this type of technology and ban this type of science, because essentially what you're doing here is you're delaying the evolution, so that what'll happen is you, on a secretive level, assuming you are the elite or someone who is aware of these things, can drop feed this type of technology. Now, what we then have to take a look at is the Stuxnet virus. The Stuxnet virus was a virus, a malicious computer worm, first uncovered in 2010, thought to have been in development since at least 2005, and it targets control and data acquisition systems, or SCADA for short, and is believed to be responsible for causing substantial damage to the nuclear program of Iran. Now, the way that worked essentially was that was deployed by the United States, whether they want to admit it or not. These viruses and these malicious computer worms and malware occur all the time. The reason why this is tied in with ADEX is because ADEX was a secret funder through the Patel Corporation towards Stuxnet. All right. And so when we take a look, why is it that a software company having to do with assisting in power plant efficiency is suddenly involved in the mix of things? This is a perfect example of the marriage of military contractors and government regulation and publication of their issues and events. Now, when we take a look at the salt mines, what we're going to find here is that the clones in which are duplicated and replicated, the ones that are deformed and are not good enough to be put out into the public and deployed, all right, they're then put into the salt mines. But the United States has had a lot of problems getting into these salt mines. But you might say, okay, Dave, why are these salt mines so important to the United States for these bodies to be buried? Well, the salt mines are significant because they obtain, based off of what I mentioned earlier through the lead lines, they, for some reason, unexplainably have the frequential and vibrational ability to suppress and decay bodies in a much more rapid, accelerated pace than that of if you just buried a body and put it in a funeral home. All right? And so this is nothing new whatsoever. The whole point of the salt mines is that whether the United States government knows this or not on a secretive level, there are frequencies that somehow decompose and decay the matter of biological bodies and human skin much, much quicker than anywhere else around the world. Now, you might say, okay, Dave, why would they constantly fight over Iran for this type of thing? Well, yes, this is just one aspect, though, guys. Keep in mind, this is just one branch of many. On top of that, Iran also denied the having the Federal Reserve come into the country many, many years ago, and since then, Iran has been labeled a tremendous enemy of the West, right? Now, again, there's more things that go to that, but at the same time, we also have to understand that this is where the bodies are buried, and ADEX is the secret funder of this behind the Patel Corporation. Now, what we also have to look at is if you take a look at ADEX's former employment registration list, employees they hired, they tend to hire employees, all former CIA and NSA employees who just so happen to be the same teams of people that were responsible for the Stuxnet virus. All right. Now, all of this ties in because when we take a look at these viruses, what we're going to understand here is not only is this able to suppress the nuclear capabilities of certain countries and to technologically destroy countries within a matter of seconds, but they have direct access connection frequentially to these synthetic clones because this malware is used to also be able to emit frequencies into the air that is harnessed by HARP to then control these clones whenever needed. Hence the reason why they're deploying so much so often. Now, when we take a look at this, what we're going to see is we're going to have to ask ourselves, why are these clones being deployed? Very basic question. for many reasons. First off, to justify false flag operations, you want to kill a bunch of people, you kill clones, and not people that have actual consciousnesses. Now, I know that might seem a little bit too ethical and moral for the United States, but they ultimately need people with souls and consciousnesses in order to maintain the order of things, because they need to keep people suppressed, but they cannot do that if the people do not have a soul. Right? And so when we take a step back and we look at all of this, there's just so much here that comes together. And there's so many things that are occurring that we still cannot explain, that unfortunately I cannot explain in this episode because I do not have the research to substantiate or ascertain the veracity of it. So let's take a look and see what we find when we take a step back. And I know I was maybe a little bit all over the place in this episode, but I felt it was very important and very significant for this to be the case for those who want to really understand the connection between these things. So let's start from the very beginning. We have 5 mock different types of replicative and duplicative clones. All right, so we have 5 different tiers, essentially. Obviously, Mach 4 and 5 are the ones being deployed into the public. The first 2 and 3 were something that was used more back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, particularly under the Kennedy administration. We then have the salt mines and the Federal Reserve that the United States is fighting Iran over secretly. Obviously, they publicly make very different statements about this, but again, the same way that they destroyed Libya and Syria, Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, and then just so happened to put someone in there who was okay with the United States Federal Reserve Bank. That, on top of the fact that they want access to the salt mines because the ley lines connect frequentially in order to help deteriorate biological composition and human matter much quicker than anywhere else in the world. So we have that. We also have the Stuxnet virus that helps emit frequencies that are utilized by HARP, that sends out frequencies while most people are sleeping within the West, because it's not that hard to figure out, PST or EST, Eastern Standard Zone times, when people are sleeping, in order to suppress them in a low frequential way so that we would not notice these clones, these Mach 4 and 5 clones when we were in the public. Perfect example of that would be Nancy Pelosi transferring consciousness glitch that she had, right? So I want you guys to let me know what you think. Let me know if you think this is some type of realistic possibility, or if the evidence here that's being connected is just something of a fluke or meant even to disinform us. So thank you so much, guys, for watching, and we will catch you guys tomorrow. Take care.